when our yacht sank. I gave my lifeboat seat to my fiance's true love because I remembered the 5 years he punished me for surviving. Instead of her, Yvonne get in, Hendrix shouted. The yacht was already filling with water. There were 3 of us, but the lifeboat held only 2, and Hendrix was the only person who knew how to operate it. One place had to be his. After a fierce internal struggle, he finally reached for my hand. In my first life, I had taken it. This time I stepped back, save Yana. I would never carry the weight of someone's death on my shoulders. Again, he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Even his furrowed brows relaxed. He took his childhood sweetheart's hand immediately. You're my fiance, he said as he guided her down. I would have chosen you, but you insisted. Stay here, I'll come back. He sailed away, without looking back, as if he feared I might change my mind. The last time Hendrix had rescued me and left Yana on the sinking. Yet we called the Coast Guard as soon as we regained service. But a storm delayed them. They recovered her body. I later understood why he had reached for me. Saving his childhood sweetheart first, while abandoning his fiancée, would have brought public criticism. The person he truly wanted to save had always been Yana. They had grown up together, and no one could compare with the years she had spent by his side. At first he showed no emotion. He handled Yana's funeral, gave her family a large sum of money, and asked only that she be buried
in a pristine grave
site with the best care. When I offered to postpone our wedding, he held my hand and said, Ivan, I am definitely marrying you. I mistook determination for love. Only later did I learn why he was determined to marry me. He wanted to make me pay for Yana's death. For 5 years, he never took me to social events, never shared a bed with me, took control of my family's business, cut me off, and made me the joke of our social circle. One night, when he was drunk, he shoved me to the floor and blamed my pain on the woman he had lost. Both of us died at the end of that life. Now I had made the choice he wished he had made. Yana was safe beside him, and I would never carry her death again, but I did not intend to replace it with my own. As soon as the lifeboat vanished, I searched the yacht as the water continued rising, because I could not swim well. I had brought several inflatable rings for the trip. I strapped on a life jacket, blew up the rings, and gathered the last bottles of water and packets of chocolate. When the yacht slipped beneath me, I pushed toward the shore. Fishing boats traveled these waters. If I stayed alive long enough, someone might pass. It was already the dead of night, the clear sky filled with thick clouds, and rain began. It was the same storm that had killed Yana in the first life. The downpour made the attempt even harder, but I kept swimming toward shore. With all my strength, I thought of Hendrix's promise to return. In the other life, he had raced for help because Yana was behind him. Now she sat safely beside him. Would he even remember that I existed? After about an hour, a shape appeared through the rain, a second yacht. Drifting ahead helped the engine, and storm swallowed my voice. The yacht drifted farther away, but I kept shouting. A figure appeared on the yacht and shone a flashlight onto the water. Someone had heard I was saved. I used the last strength in my body to reach the light. A ladder dropped over the side, and I nearly collapsed several times while climbing. When I finally crossed the rail, my knees gave way. A man caught me before I struck the deck. Are you all right? I'm fine. Thank you. He carried me into a cabin and gave me dry clothes because I was soaking wet. After he left, I changed out of the nightgown I had never had time to replace. Before the yacht began sinking, a knock came just as I finished. He returned carrying a bowl of noodles and set it on the table. I was too hungry to do anything but eat. Only afterward did I study him. He had sharp features and the disciplined bearing of someone from the military. I'm Yvonne Lewis. Andrew Grant's eyes moved to the scratches across my hands. Those need to be cleaned. Ocean water can cause infection. He dried my hair, then applied iodine to each cut with careful hands. The gentleness hurt more than medicine. In my first life, Hendrix once came home drunk after our marriage. I helped him to the bedroom and asked him to drink less. He shoved me so hard that the back of my head struck the floor. Blood ran from the back of my head. Hendrix watched without moving. Painful, he asked. Yana hurt 1,000 times more when she drowned. If I hadn't saved you, she would be alive. Everything is your fault. Your enemies sabotaged the yacht, I told him. You ordered me into the lifeboat. Why are you blaming me? His face went cold. I never wanted our marriage. If you hadn't told my grandmother you liked me, he wouldn't have forced me. He blamed everyone except the enemies who sank us, and himself for choosing. I took a cab to the hospital, alone, bleeding all the way. From that moment, our relationship hit rock bottom, and I never showed him vulnerability. Again, now a stranger frowned because a scratch might become infected.
My eyes stung.
I turned away and took a deep breath to hold the tears back. Thank you, I whispered. Andrew gave me a small, warm smile. You're welcome. A voice came from the doorway. Mr. Grant, are you in here? A man in pajamas and black framed glasses stood there. He glanced at Andrew, then at me. Sir, you called about someone falling overboard. Is this the young lady? Andrew nodded. He is the medic on board. He can check that you're all right. Dr. Enfield examined me and asked several questions. Then he stood and turned to Andrew. There are no serious injuries, but she is exhausted from being in the sea too long. A good rest is all she needs. Andrew escorted him to the door, and they exchanged a few quiet words. Through the cabin window, the rain had intensified and darkness obscured the sea. I could not help but feel a small sense of relief. We're heading to land, Andrew said. Where do you live? I can take you home. For some selfish reason, I did not want to go home. My parents were rarely home, and even when they were, I hardly saw them. I could disappear for a month without either of them noticing. As for Hendrix, if he had been reborn too, he should be with Yana, now cherishing the second chance he wanted. I remembered Andrew as well. He was the youngest son of the Grant family, and the only person who tried to help when I sought a divorce in my previous life. He had saved me twice. I don't have anywhere to go, I said. Could you let me stay with you for a few days? Andrew did not answer. Immediately I caught his sleeve. He lowered his head until his face was close to mine. The sudden closeness made me dizzy. I could smell the faint scent of mint on him. I'm not a good man. Staying with me will come with a price. Fine, whatever you want. Are you sure? Of course, he smiled. By the time we reached shore, I was running a fever. Andrew carried me off the yacht. A familiar voice cut through the rain. Yvonne, is that really you? Hendrix stood on the dock with the police, likely preparing a search and rescue. When he saw me, he rushed over with concern in his eyes. Ivan, are you all right? I stepped down from Andrew's arms and glared at the man who had sailed away without once turning his head. Do I look like something is wrong? The drizzle came down in needle-sharp sheets, catching the harsh glare of the harbor floodlights. Hendrix froze on the wet timber of the pier. His tailored jacket was soaked through at the shoulders, his hair plastered against his forehead in dark, messy strands. Behind him, two maritime officers in neon-trimmed slickers were still checking coordinates on a clipboard, while an ambulance idled nearby, its rotating red lights painting the puddles like fresh blood. Yvonne. Hendrix's voice cracked. He reached out instinctively, his fingers twitching toward my arm. You're alive. God, Yvonne, do you have any idea what? Don't touch me, I said. The words were neither loud nor breathless. They were dead, flat stones dropped into stagnant water. Hendrix's hand halted midair. A muscle leaped in his jaw. In our past life, whenever he raised his voice or narrowed his eyes, my chest would tighten in panic, conditioned to apologize for things I had never done.
Now, seeing the
faint tremor in his fingers, I felt only a profound, hollow repulsion. Beside him, wrapped in an oversized thermal blanket inside the police shelter, sat Yana. Her face was pale, her dark eyes wide and damp with theater quality
distress.
When she saw me standing on 2 feet, the delicate trembling of her shoulders paused for a fraction of a second before she threw the blanket aside and rushed toward us, stumbling just enough to appear fragile. Yvonne, Yana choked out, tears brimming instantly. Thank heavens. Hendrix and I were losing our minds. The storm got so bad, the Coast Guard told us to wait for daybreak, but Hendrix insisted on sending a private team back out. We came straight here. Did you? I asked quietly, looking past her to the clock tower at the edge of the marina. It was nearly 4 a.m. The yacht began taking on water at 11. I continued, each word measured and cold. The harbor is a 40-minute run in that lifeboat's motorized dinghy. Even with the squall, you made land before 1. If you had alerted the port authority immediately, the emergency beacon on our hull would have been triangulated within 20 minutes. Hendrix's expression hardened, defensive anger rising to mask the guilty flicker in his eyes. The signal tower on the north ridge was knocked out by lightning. Yvonne, we couldn't get a cellular connection until we hit the inner channel. You think I sat on my hands? I spent 3 hours begging the harbor master to dispatch a deep-water cutter in this weather. And yet, a low, resonant baritone cut through the rain. My radar picked up your dinghy docking cleanly at the private slip at 12:40. Without a single distress flare fired. Andrew Grant stepped forward into the perimeter of the floodlights. The temperature on the dock seemed to drop several degrees. Andrew hadn't bothered to zip his dark windbreaker. His posture was rigid, imposing, carrying the unmistakable, quiet menace of a man who had spent years giving orders in places where mistakes cost lives. The harbor officers recognized him immediately. The younger one lowered his radio, and the older officer straightened his posture, murmuring, "Mr. Grant." Hendrix snapped his gaze to Andrew, his brows drawing into a furious knot. "Andrew Grant? What the hell does this have to do with you? Why is my fiance on your vessel?" "Because your fiance was floating 3 miles off the shoals with an inflatable ring and a life vest," Andrew replied smoothly. He didn't raise his voice, but the contempt in it was razor-sharp. "While you were in the harbor master's dry lounge, sipping hot tea and sorting out your private insurance reports." Hendrix's face flushed and ugly, mottled red. "You watch your mouth. You don't know the first thing about what happened out there. The lifeboat was compromised. We were overloaded. The Zodiac Mark IV you were driving," Andrew interrupted calmly, "is certified for 4 adults in open water and 6 in calm sea. Even with the battery failure on your main yacht, that dinghy had a 600-pound payload. You left her behind because you panicked, Mr. Sterling, or because you simply prioritized your childhood playmate over the woman you swore to protect." Yana let out a soft, wounded gasp, burying her face into Hendrix's sleeve. "Hendrix, don't let him twist it like that. Yvonne told us to go."
She told you to save me.
"I didn't want to leave her. I begged you to let me stay." "Enough," I said. The single word cut Yana off mid-sob. I looked at Hendrix. In my previous life, I had spent 5 years searching for a single glimpse of remorse in this man's face. I had cleaned his wounds, managed his household, let his mother belittle me at charity galas, and absorbed every ounce of his drunken venom. All because I thought I owed him for my life. I had believed his lie that our ruined youth was my fault. Now, looking at him standing under the harbor lights, I saw him for what he truly was, a coward who draped himself in noble excuses. "You don't need to explain anything, Hendrix," I said, my voice steady despite the shivers running through my feverish body. "You made your choice, and I have made mine." I reached into the pocket of the dry jacket Andrew had lent me, pulled out the platinum engagement ring that had survived the swim in my zipped inner pocket, and dropped it into the puddle between our feet. The small splash was swallowed by the rain, but the metallic clink against the wet asphalt sounded like a gunshot. "The engagement is over," I said. Hendrix stared at the ring in the mud, his pupils dilating. For a man who cared about nothing more than public reputation and control, the sight of his betrothal ring discarded in front of maritime police and harbor crew was an unbearable insult. "Yvonne, you're out of your mind from shock," Hendrix hissed, lunging forward to grab my wrist. "You're coming with me right now. We'll talk about this at home, when you've calmed down." Before his fingers could graze my skin, Andrew stepped between us. The movement was effortless, but the impact was absolute. Andrew caught Hendrix by the forearm with a grip that made Hendrix wince instantly, bending his wrist back just enough to halt his momentum. "She gave you her answer," Andrew said quietly, his dark eyes leveling a gaze that made the breath catch in Hendrix's throat. "Take another step toward her, and I will have the port police charge you with maritime endangerment before sunrise." Hendrix tried to wrench his arm free, but Andrew held him immovable for 2 agonizing seconds before releasing him with a subtle push that sent Hendrix stumbling back half a pace. "Mr. Grant," Hendrix choked out, his voice shaking with humiliation and suppressed rage. "This is a private matter between the Sterling and Lewis families. You have no right to interfere. The Grant Corporation owns 60% of the deepwater salvage rights in this bay," Andrew replied coolly, turning his back on him. "And tonight I pulled Miss Lewis from the sea. That makes her well-being my business until she tells me otherwise." Andrew turned to me, his tone shifting entirely. The harshness in his eyes dissolved into something measured and steady. "The car is waiting. Let's get your fever treated." I didn't look back at Hendrix. I didn't look at Yana, whose faux innocent facade was beginning to crack into genuine panic at the sight of the ring in the dirt. I turned and walked alongside Andrew toward the sleek black sedan idling at the pier's exit. As the heated interior of the car enveloped me and the door clicked shut, the heavy, suffocating iron band that had wrapped around my chest for 2 lifetimes finally snapped. The Grant residence was not a gaudy estate perched on a hill like the Sterling mansion. It was a secluded, stone-built compound nestled against the coastal Pine ridges, secure and profoundly quiet. By the time we arrived, the fever had fully set in. My thoughts felt thick, weighed down by the chill of the Atlantic and the phantom memories of a life that was no longer mine. Dr. Enfield, who had ridden ahead from the boat, was waiting in a spacious guest suite on the second floor. He administered an intravenous drip for dehydration and infection, bandaged the deeper cuts on my palms, and gave me a mild sedative. Through the haze of exhaustion, I saw Andrew standing near the French doors of the balcony, his back to the room, listening quietly as Enfield gave his instructions. "She has remarkable resilience," the doctor murmured, packing his case. "Most people would have succumbed to hypothermia within 40 minutes in that swell, but the fever will peak before dawn. Keep her warm." When the door clicked shut, Andrew walked over to the side of the bed. He pulled a heavy armchair closer and sat down, resting his forearms on his knees. The room was lit only by a low amber lamp on the nightstand. In the soft light, his features looked less severe, though the sharp angle of his jaw and the quiet intensity in his eyes remained. "You gave up the ring very easily," Andrew said, his voice low in the quiet room. "In high society, a severed engagement between Sterling and Lewis is a declaration of war. Your father will not be pleased." I looked up at the ceiling, watching the faint shadows of rain tracing lines across the plaster. "My father cares about our shipping logistics contract with the Sterlings."
He does not care about me.
"He never has." In my first life, when Hendrix had locked me out of the family business and systematically stripped my mother's legacy away, my father had told me to endure it for the sake of the family alliance. When I came home with bruises hidden beneath high collars, my father had simply looked away and reminded me that the Sterling Group was preparing an IPO. "I won't be a bargaining chip again," I whispered. Andrew studied my face for a long moment. "You speak as if you've already lived through the consequences." My heart gave a slight, wary jolt, but I kept my breathing steady. When you're drowning in the dark, you have plenty of time to realize what your life was worth to the people you left behind. A faint, humorless smirk touched the corner of Andrew's lips. "Fair enough." He leaned back in the chair, crossing one long leg over the other. "Earlier on the boat, you asked to stay with me for a few days. You said you would pay whatever price I asked." "I did," I said, meeting his gaze. "What do you want, Mr. Grant?" "I want the Sterling Group off our northern shipping routes," Andrew said, the casualness of his tone belying the sheer ambition behind the statement.
For
3 years, Hendrix's father has been using gray market intermediaries to undercut the Grant logistics network in the coastal ports. He uses your family's registered warehouses to mask his manifests. I looked at him, my mind clearing instantly through the fog of fever. In my previous life, 2 years after Hendrix and I married, a major contraband scandal had broken out in the Lewis family warehouses. Hendrix had publicly stepped in to rescue my family from criminal liability, using the scandal to force my father to transfer 51% of Lewis Logistics to the Sterling Group for pennies on the dollar. At the time, I had thought Hendrix was our savior. Only years later, while digging through discarded corporate records after he had cast me aside, did I realize that the contraband had been placed there by Hendrix's own front companies. He had manufactured my family's ruin to devour us whole. "The third-party logistics firm is called Vane Maritime," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, crisp whisper. "Their registration is under an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands, but the primary signatory is Yana's older brother, Julian Cole." Andrew's eyes sharpened. For the first time, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his impassive face. "You know about Vane Maritime?" he asked. "I know that Hendrix uses Julian to sign documents he doesn't want tied to the Sterling name," I said. "And I know that in 2 weeks, a cargo vessel named the Northern Star is scheduled to dock at Berth 4 in the Lewis family South Terminal. On paper, it carries imported machine parts. In reality, it holds unlicensed precision electronics intended for black market export." Andrew sat up slowly, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that felt electric. "If that cargo is seized under Lewis jurisdiction, your father faces a federal investigation. Not if the Lewis family files a whistleblower report with the Maritime Customs Bureau 24 hours before the ship enters territorial waters," I countered, the fire in my veins burning hotter than any fever. "And not if the Grant Corporation provides the alternative supply chain to take over the legitimate shipping contracts that the Sterlings will forfeit when their licenses are revoked." Silence fell over the room, broken only by the steady hum of the rain against
The glass.
Andrew looked at me not as a rescued victim, but as an equal player at a high-stakes table. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. You really are full of surprises, Miss Lewis. I am simply done playing the martyr, I replied. You wanted a price, Mr.
Grant.
I am offering you the complete dismantlement of the Sterling logistics.
Monopoly.
In return, I want your personal legal team to draft an irrevocable asset separation agreement between my family and the Sterlings, and I want Grant security around my residence. Andrew stood up, his tall silhouette blocking the amber lamplight. He reached out, not with the predatory entitlement of Hendrix, but with the measured formality of an ally sealing a pact. He took my uninjured fingers in his warm, calloused hand. Deal, he said. The storm passed by mid-morning, leaving behind a brilliant, washed-out blue sky and a tempest of public gossip. By noon, the high society circles of the city were alight with rumors. The news that Hendrix Sterling had returned from a shipwreck with his childhood friend, while his fiance was left in the water, had already begun to leak from the harbor staff. But what truly set the city buzzing was the statement issued directly from the Grant Corporation's legal department. Miss Yvonne Lewis has formally retained Grant Legal Services to execute the dissolution of her betrothal to Mr. Hendrix Sterling. Furthermore, all joint corporate explorations between Lewis Logistics and Sterling Enterprises are currently under internal audit. My phone had not stopped ringing since 10 in the morning. There were 17 missed calls from my father, 8 from Hendrix's mother, and over 30 from Hendrix himself. I had blocked their numbers and handed the device to Dr. Enfield to monitor. I spent the afternoon in the sunlit library of Andrew's estate, wrapped in a soft cashmere sweater, reviewing the corporate registry files Andrew's assistants had pulled for me. Having lived through the next 5 years, once before, my memory was a map of Hendrix's future maneuvers. I knew every shell company he would create, every politician he would bribe, and every vulnerability he would hide. The heavy mahogany doors of the library opened, and Andrew walked in. He had changed into a tailored charcoal suit without a tie, looking every bit the ruthless heir of the Grant Empire. Your father is at the front gate, Andrew said, setting a porcelain cup of herbal tea on the desk in front of me. He brought Hendrix with him, along with 4 corporate lawyers. I took a slow sip of the tea, the warmth steadying my nerves. Did they bring press? They tried, Andrew said with a dry chuckle. My security turned to reporters, away at the foot of the hill. But your father is threatening to file an unlawful detainment report against me if I don't release you. I closed the ledger in front of me and stood up. Let them in. You don't have to face them here, Andrew said, his voice dropping slightly, genuine concern shadowing his gaze. My attorneys can handle the paperwork in 30 minutes. You never have to see Hendrix again if you don't want to. I looked up at him, shaking my head. If I hide behind your lawyers, Hendrix will convince himself that I'm being coerced. He will play the devoted, heartbroken fiancé fighting for his stolen bride. I need him to see my face when I destroy that fantasy. Andrew looked at me for 3 quiet seconds, then nodded slowly. I'll be right beside you. The downstairs drawing room was suffused with tension thick enough to choke on. When I entered the room, my father, Arthur Lewis, was pacing across the Persian rug, his face purple with anger. Hendrix sat on the sofa, his jacket immaculate. Once more, though dark circles shadowed his eyes. Beside him was his personal attorney, Mr. Bradley. When Hendrix saw me walk in unharmed, composed, and dressed in the understated luxury of the Grant estate, his eyes flared with a mixture of possessive relief and fury. Yvonne, Hendrix sprang up, closing the distance between us. Thank God.
Do you
know what kind of nightmare this morning has been? The press is running wild with ridiculous stories. Your father and I have been trying to reach you for 10 hours. Yvonne, you've lost your mind, my father roared, pointing a trembling finger
at me?
What is this nonsense about an audit? What is this press release from the Grant Corporation? Do you have any idea what this is doing to our stock value? Arthur, Andrew's cold voice cut across the room as he stepped in behind me. You are a guest in my home. Lower your voice. My father stiffened. For all his bluster, Arthur Lewis was a man who bowed to greater power, and the Grant family sat at the very top of the food chain. He swallowed hard, adjusting his tie, but his glare remained fixed on me. Yvonne, come home right now, my father demanded in a lowered, venomous tone. You survived an accident. It was chaotic. Hendrix did everything he could to rescue you, to throw away a 5-year engagement over a misunderstanding during a crisis is childish and insane. A misunderstanding? I looked at my father, feeling no sorrow, only the cold clarity of absolute detachment. He took the only 2-person craft and sailed away with Yana Cole. He left me to drown in the dark. If Mr. Grant had not crossed my path, you wouldn't be worrying about your stock price today, father. You would be planning my funeral. I came back for you, Hendrix yelled, stepping forward, his hands clenching into fists. I told you I was coming back. The storm was too heavy, the waves were 6 feet high. I had to get Yana to safety first because she doesn't know how to swim. And I do. I asked, my voice cutting through his lies like a scalpel. You have known me for 7 years, Hendrix. You know I have had a phobia of open water
Since I was a child.
You knew precisely what leaving me out there meant. Hendrix choked on his words, his face pale.
I
thought you could hold on to the wreckage until the Coast Guard arrived. I didn't want to leave you. You were the one who told me to take Yana. You told me to step back. Yes, I said, looking him dead in the eye.
Because I finally realized that.
Your instinct in a crisis will always be to sacrifice me. That's not true. Hendrix reached out, his expression morphing into desperate urgency. Yvonne, listen to me. I love you. You are my fiance. Yana is just, she's a childhood friend whose family has been close to mine for decades. I felt responsible for her safety. If you're angry, we can postpone the wedding. We can go to Europe for 6 months. I'll buy you the villa in Lake Como you always wanted. Just stop this Grant madness and come home. In my previous life, when he had held my hand after Yana's funeral and swore he would marry me, I had wept with gratitude, thinking his insistence was devotion. I had spent half a decade paying for that delusion in blood and tears. I don't want Lake Como, I said calmly. And I don't want you. I turned to Mr. Bradley, Hendrix's lawyer. Mr. Bradley, did you bring the preliminary partnership documentation for the Northern Star shipment? Bradley blinked, caught off guard. The Maritime Logistics Manifest? Yes. Mr. Sterling requested the signatures today to finalize the Lewis warehouse lease. Don't give her that. Hendrix snapped, his voice suddenly sharp with panic. Give it to me, I said, extending my hand. Bradley, intimidated by Andrew's towering presence standing directly behind my shoulder, hesitated for a second before handing over the leather-bound folder. I opened it, flipped directly to page 14, and pointed to the primary indemnification clause. Look at this, father, I said, holding the document in front of Arthur Lewis's
face.
Clause 14b. In the event of illicit or undeclared cargo seized on the Northern Star, the operational lessee, Lewis Logistics, assumes 100% of all criminal and civil liability. The Sterling Group is entirely insulated. My father's eyes darted across the paragraph. As a businessman, he was weak-willed, but he was not illiterate. His face slowly drained of color. What is this, Hendrix? My father whispered, looking up. You told me this was a standard joint venture contract. It is standard, Hendrix stammered, his eyes darting toward the exits.
It's
boilerplate legal phrasing, Arthur. It means nothing. It means that in 2 weeks, when Maritime Customs raids Berth 4, you intended to let my father go to federal prison while you absorbed Lewis Logistics under a court-mandated restructuring, I said with chilling precision. Just as Yana, Cole's brother, Julian, received a $5 million wire transfer into his Swiss holding account yesterday morning from your personal discretionary fund. Hendrix's jaw dropped. The color completely vanished from his skin, leaving him a ghastly, hollow white. How do you know about that? He breathed, his voice barely audible. There was no way I could know. The wire transfer had been executed less than 24 hours ago, encrypted through 3 private proxies. In this lifetime, it had barely happened. But in my past life, that very transaction record had been presented as evidence during the bankruptcy hearing that ruined my family. I know everything, Hendrix, I said softly, stepping closer until only a foot of air separated us. I know who you are in the dark. I know what you do when you think no one is watching. Hendrix took an involuntary step back, terror flickering behind his eyes. For a terrifying second, he looked at me not as the submissive fiancé he had controlled for years, but as an omniscient ghost that had climbed out of a ocean to drag him down. Get out of this house, I said. And if you or any member of the Sterling family contacts me again, these documents go directly to the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. My father looked between me and the damning contract in his hands. The realization of how close he had come to total ruin shattered his arrogance. Without a word to Hendrix, my father turned and practically fled out the front
Doors.
Hendrix stood frozen in the center of the room. He looked at me, then at Andrew, who was standing behind me with an arm casually draped across the back of my chair, a silent, unyielding fortress. "You'll regret this, Yvonne," Hendrix whispered, his voice trembling with a toxic blend of rage and desperate grief. "You think Andrew Grant cares about
You?
He's using you to get to my family's shipping routes. When he's done with you'll have nothing." "Even with nothing," I said, "I would still be infinitely richer than a single day spent as your wife." Hendrix clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white, then spun on his heel and stormed out into the daylight. The following 2 weeks were a masterclass in calculated warfare. With Andrew's elite legal and intelligence teams behind me, we moved with surgical precision. I provided the coordinates, the shell company registrations, and the timeline of Hendrix's operations. Andrew provided the institutional leverage, the deep water resources, and the direct line to the regulatory authorities. 8 days after the confrontation in the drawing room, the Northern Star crossed into territorial waters. Instead of docking at the Lewis family South Terminal, it was intercepted by Coast Guard cutters 5 miles off the coast, flanked by 2 of Grant Corporation's private patrol vessels. The contraband was seized before it ever touched domestic soil. By sunset, federal agents had raided Vane Maritime's headquarters. Julian Cole was arrested at the airport attempting to board a flight to Zurich. Under 6 hours of interrogation, terrified of facing a 20-year sentence. Alone, Julian broke completely. He handed over every encrypted ledger, every offshore bank record, and every audio recording he had secretly kept of Hendrix. Sterling giving the orders. The fall of the Sterling Empire was swift and brutal. The public scandal was colossal. The media tore Hendrix apart, the golden heir, who abandoned his fiance in a shipwreck, only to be exposed as the mastermind behind a massive cross-border smuggling ring that framed his own partners. The Sterling Group stock plummeted 70% in 48 hours. The creditors called in loans, partners tore up contracts, and the board of directors held an emergency vote to strip Hendrix and his father of all executive authority. Through it all, I remained at the Grant estate, watching the empire that had once crushed me burn to ash on the morning news. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in deep hues of violet and rose, I walked down to the estate's private cliffside terrace overlooking the sea. The breeze was cool, carrying the sharp scent of pine and salt. A pair of footsteps approached, rhythmic and steady. Andrew walked up beside me, handing me a glass of sparkling cider.
He was
dressed simply in a dark wool sweater, the wind ruffling his short, dark hair. "It's over," Andrew said quietly, leaning his arms against the stone balustrade. "The federal prosecutor formally indicted Hendrix 30 minutes ago. Bail was denied due to flight risk. He's going away for a very long time, Yvonne." I looked out over the endless horizon of the water. In my first life, I had spent 5 years locked in a cold, loveless mansion, listening to the rain, and wondering what I had done to deserve so much cruelty. I had died in the bitter cold of a hospital room, broken and forgotten. Now, the ocean before me was vast, quiet, and free. "And Yana?" I asked softly. She tried to claim she was an innocent bystander, Andrew said with a faint
sneer.
Julian's confession proved she was the direct beneficiary of 2 offshore trusts funded by the smuggling profits. She was arrested this afternoon. Outside her apartment, a quiet, profound peace settled over my chest. There was no petty triumph in my heart, no wild hysteria of revenge. Only the clean, untainted weight of justice finally fulfilled. "Thank you, Andrew," I said, turning to look at him. Andrew turned his head, his dark eyes fixing onto mine with an intensity that made the cool ocean breeze feel warm. "You don't owe me any thanks," he said softly. "You did this. You stood up, you fought back, and you took your life back with your own hands. You pulled me out of the water," I said. "Twice." Andrew's eyes softened, a faint, rare vulnerability breaking through his disciplined exterior. "In another life," he murmured, his voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the surf, "I watched a man destroy you, and I arrived too late to stop it. I swore to myself that if I ever had another chance, I would stand between you and the dark. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I looked into his eyes, into the quiet, unyielding depth of a man who had never questioned my worth, who had protected me without demanding my soul in return. You remember? I whispered, my voice trembling with the revelation. Andrew smiled, a gentle, beautiful smile that erased years of bitterness and
Pain.
he reached out, his warm, strong hand gently closing around mine, his fingers interlacing with mine over the stone railing. I remember that you deserve to be loved without conditions, he said softly. And this time, Yvonne, we have the rest of our lives. I looked down at our joined hands, then up at the brilliant, clear sky, stretching over the open sea. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, the storm had truly ended. And for the first time, I looked forward to tomorrow.